by learning what that process looks like and how it feels and the logic behind it within a computational setting. They also have a large competition called Sea Change, which is not quite like 42 hours, but it's kind of neat. They also have a long-standing, really successful Center for the Arts in Medicine. And theater students can take a class. They get credit by working in the hospital. And they work in the medical school specifically. And they embody illness. They become a patient with whatever disease, right? So they have to study up and know what it means. They have to do the research to become a patient with MS, right? And the medical students have to work with them, time and time again to not only diagnose them correctly, but learn how to treat them. So it's this kind of, allied sharing of skill building. They've also found other ways to work together. I'm certain some of you have heard of the many ways that, ballroom dance, for example, and various other kind of embodied movement, kind of conscious movement like that is really good for fighting degenerative brain diseases, right? So, if like my wife's grandma, for example, is 90 and she does Sudoku because she's really worried about getting Alzheimer's. Well, she's just getting really good at Sudoku, right? She's not necessarily fighting Alzheimer's. She's just getting really good at Sudoku. And, good for her. But that's, the research doesn't suggest that's what's going to keep her brain healthy. And then finally, at University of Florida, neat example, this image right here is a sparse matrix, for you computer folks out there. It is a mathematical model that at least this person considers artwork. He has a series of these. They all look very different than this. Some of them look like fish. Some of them look like poppies. Some of them look like a bouquet of poppies. Some of them look like a crazy fishnet orb thing, depending on the mathematical model. So people come up with mathematical models that work for X, Y, and Z. This one happens to be an optimized financial portfolio. You can see that he has diversified assets in each zone, and he's a mathematician. I'm not going to claim that he has great arts training, okay? But it's pretty neat stuff. He considers himself a data curator. Our colleagues at Virginia Tech, right? They just started something called the Institute for Creativity, Arts, and Technology. It's been up and running for maybe 2 or 3 years now, 2 years probably. This is their rendering of what they call the cube. And the cube is a space where you put on 3D glasses and there are projectors all over the place that project an image, and you can in real time see on a microscopic level particular rushes of chemicals. Like you could put a brain up, right? And you could see chemicals entering, and you could map chemical processes within a brain in real time. And if a physician wanted to come in and say, see what the particular impact is for various synapses or something. I have no I don't know. You know better than I do. A lot better than I do. You do too. What that even looks like. But that's possible. Or you can manipulate various variables and create sculptures, right? Like digital sculptures or whatever artistic purposes you want. Another analog to this, not at Virginia Tech, but Xbox Connect, right? Like the Kinects or whatever it is. It can map where you are in three-dimensional space, right? So our colleagues at UC Berkeley, there's a choreographer who got a grant for like $100,000 to refab a kind of a busted space, and she put Kinects all over the place, and now she can dance with, kind of virtually, a 3D rendering in real time of a colleague anywhere on the planet, or if this person's not on the planet, then there. kind of neat, right? That physical space gets eliminated from the equation. Our friends at Carnegie Mellon, they have this exhibition, The Cultural Frontiers of Space Travel. They have something called the Zero Gravity Arts Consortium. Right? It's kind of intense. Artists whose medium is outer space. But our friends there have something called Exceed. There's a movement out there, again, part of that list that I had from the beginning, that's part of this cultural turn, or creative turn in this case. Science, engineering, arts, and design, all together. People go to this space, exceed.org, and kind of trade this information across industry and arts bodies out there in the world. They're also getting really involved with the maker movement. This summer, the White House had a big kind of maker movement STEM focused, I don't know, festival or pageant of some kind for K through 12 folks. And Carnegie Mellon, along with a few other bodies out there in the world, are trying to create a framework to understand what that means at the K-12 level. I would argue that the maker movement is very much informed by arts and design practices, right? The kind of the play of it, and the not having a defined outcome necessarily, and also sort of the execution of vision, right, in that kind of a space. They also have something called the BXA, which you kind of fill in the X, right? And something called the Studio for Creative Inquiry. MIT. Our colleagues at MIT have, for a very long time, had something called the Media Lab. It's run by a gentleman named Todd Mackover, and Todd himself he's a composer, he works in music and computation. And then in the laboratory next to him is someone who spent most of his life as a kind of an adventurer, and then on one of his adventures he lost a couple of his limbs, and then he went to graduate school, and now he makes lightweight carbon, very aesthetically pleasing prostheses, right? And that's like in the lab next door, right? And so lots of labs like that. They also have in their art museum, the List Art Museum, a whole gallery of holograms. Like you go to there and there's a hologram gallery. Also, they really have no arts majors. I mean, it's the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, right? You can't like major in art, but they have lots of arts classes. But one of the things that people do in their spare time is they babysit the nuclear reactor that's on campus. I just thought I'd throw that in there as what, you know? Our friends at Penn State, they have something called the Studio Lab. It is a studio for scientists and a lab for artists. And there you have it. They also are trying to design a lot of MOOCs that kind of deal in this area that I've been discussing. They also have, for like a fee for a couple $1,000s, they'll rapid prototype anything that you have the schematics done for. Kind of an intense service. I promise that I'm almost done with this portion. The marathon of our friends. University of Virginia. One of their interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary world really revolves around and is sort of all done through architecture. It's interesting because the architecture and engineering there have really reached out to the school to arts, and the arts are like, no, we're good. And we actually find that a lot across the country, that our colleagues in the sciences and technological fields are really eager to have their students get trained in these creative practices that are what the arts and design have been housing for a really long time, in some cases millennia. And the artists, because of many reasons, I guess, often find themselves trying to protect a certain amount of territory, which can have both potentially positive consequences and disastrous ones for the arts, depending on the situation and what the ask is. For example, more and more and more, we are finding that you only have a few words or a few seconds to really convince the NSF that your project is the project, right? So how do you get their attention in a meaningful way? Well, it needs to be really well designed, right, your proposal. If you can have data visualization of some kind available for them. All right, well, let's say I don't have those skills, right? The PI doesn't have those skills. So what do? You reach out to your colleagues that do have those skills. Well, that's a really instrumental use of someone's training and way of knowing the world, right? That can often be very insulting to the artist or a designer to be seen as a beautifier. Just make something pretty out of this, right? That can be a very demeaning thing to do. So artists get very territorial about that because the arts are a way of knowing, they're a way of doing, not just their products. And even then, the products are more than what we often think they are. And then finally, us, University of Michigan. So I mentioned Arts Engine. Really, the other stuff is what's really cool too. We have some of the coolest stuff going on in theater and musical performance anywhere. In the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, you can get a degree in performing arts and technology. So I hired a student for a little while she was doing two majors in that school. One in performing arts and technology and one in flute performance. So she's a classically trained flautist, but she also was way into programming and computation. And she wrote a program with no lag that would it would essentially make a visual scape around her that would react to her playing and move with her playing, and based on the pitch and the volume and the tempo, she programmed these variables to do different things. So it would react to her playing in a visual way. There's a professor here, I think he holds a joint appointment in engineering and art and design, named Max Stein, and he, if you didn't know what it was that he did, you might call it origami. But it's far more complex than that because he has this in-depth kind of sculptural training. He's very much an artist. And as it turns out, people in nanotechnology have a problem of delivery. Often the technologies, the small technologies, they're very fragile, right? And they need something to contain them. And then once they're delivered to where they need to be, they need that container to open up in the right amount of time and in the right set of conditions. In a way that, if you think about the various containers that the rovers from Mars land in, there's the parachute method, which has about a 50-50 reputation. And then there's the, I don't even know what that structure would be. Some sort of tetrahedral delivery system covered in bumpers or balloons. And then it bounces and it rolls. And it lands on the weighted side and it all opens up. Okay, well imagine that on a nanoscale. That's what they use, he was a partner and he changed the field of science, right? It's not just a technology, but it's a whole area now in the sciences, these delivery vehicles and containers based on sculpture. This course, for example, right? Also, I had a great conversation with a gentleman from public health who is kind of a bigwig head of a lab, and he has been, for the last few years, he's been forcing his lab mates to take improv classes so that they would be able to, talk to each other, right? Talk to other people. Bioinformatics in general has a real problem of relying on the science. And as it turns out, you can rely on the science. You just have to communicate it better. You can't just be like I don't know, like look at the z-score. Like that's a pretty weak way. Like my n is so big, this is statistically significant. Thank you. Like what do you say to that? You know, it's about being on the fly, being able to react in a meaningful way, right? To condense a lot of information quickly and give the right answer in a way that means something to someone else. And you know, in his mind, that's part of an arts practice, a fluidity. We do a lot of sonification and visualization. We have numerous hackathons. In fact, art and design itself had or will have, I don't know if it happened yet or not, a hackathon. Like it's normally you see those in computer science or various other places, but it's like an art and design hackathon, which is pretty cool. And then of course the things I mentioned earlier. So the last little bit here, we surveyed. How am I on time, Leah? Am I okay? All right.
You usually leave the last 20 minutes for Q&A, but it's up to you.
All right. Yeah, I'll shut up soon. I did something very unscientific, and I just rounded up to the next whole number. So forgive it. You know, it's one of those things where I didn't want to have a ton of text on slides and decimal points. All right. So of all those people we interviewed, we also survey them. 3/4 or so indicated that their institutional climate toward arts integrative interdisciplinarity is actively supportive or supportive. So this is on a kind of a scale of 5, a Likert scale. So the two strongest possible responses got the overwhelming majority. Little less than 2/3 reported that the institutional climate toward research in, through, or about the arts was actively supportive or supportive. Again, the two strongest. 75% that felt that their contributions to interdisciplinary collaborations were either integral or paramount. In our scale, those were, again, the two strongest. And I should say that about half of the people interviewed were artists. So this is an interesting breakdown. 50% reported that disciplinary boundaries manifested themselves somewhat in collaborations, although 17% said heavily. Somewhat is the middle one. And it was probably a cop-out in the survey for a lot of people. But what we mean by disciplinary boundaries is someone was a jerk, essentially. That's a silly way to put it. But what I really mean is that you know, there was a mismatch between the ways of knowing of one field and the ways of knowing in another. And they just couldn't find a way to make them line up. All right, last little bit here. 50% reported that divergent methodological approaches have been somewhat of a hindrance. 30% said minimal. So, you know, it's been a problem, but not as big as some might think. 75% reported that personal asymmetries were minimal or somewhat of an issue. So here's the deal. That's not that bad. It's pretty difficult to get along with other people who see the world really differently than you do. So this is all really encouraging to me, especially this last piece. 97% stated that they would do it again. These collaborations with people from way outside of their field, which is amazing. That's actually amazing to me. That suggests, along with all the other information that we have gathered, that this is the growing trend, this creative turn. And you're all part of it because you're in this class. And you know, you selected this class because you think this way, or you're here and part of this lecture series. So some of the primary challenges, right? Something that we've dubbed disciplinary vernaculars. You know, how do you talk with someone who means something very different than you do when you say the same words, right? So let's take the word color, for example. Color is a whole set of theory in visual arts, color theory, right? Color in computer programming means a particular kind of pixelation, I think. Computer science folks probably know better than I do. Color in the humanities might mean particular racial biases, right, and colonial histories and all kinds of stuff. And they have different baggages, so it's not just the definition of the word, but the whole history, the whole way, everything that language and that history represents of how they made knowledge in that particular arena. So someone brings that whole thing to bear with them. Tenure and promotion procedures, not something you guys necessarily care about, but I will say that for many professors, doing this kind of work is still considered an add-on. It's something special above and beyond that they have to do. So all the universities are trying to find ways to make this kind of work tenurable, something that you can promote and make part of regular old university life. And they're going to have to figure it out in the next little while here, otherwise they're going to be behind the times. In some cases, they even hire interdisciplinary scholars, and then they don't know how to give them tenure. It's kind of hilarious. I mean, tragic. Hilarious. Norms of validation and dissemination. This is part of that tenure problem. All right, so let's say that I am a ceramicist. Okay, so I teach intro to ceramics and whatever. And I am way into ecology. And I want to publish in an ecology journal. And something about my training makes it so I can. Like how, it's not an exhibition, right? It's not an exhibition at a particularly high venue. No, or maybe it's that, maybe it's something entirely different. Maybe I'm that same ceramicist, but I'm not conforming to the norms of the scientific realm with peer-reviewed journals. And I'm not conforming to the norms of the artistic world with shows and exhibitions. Instead, I teamed up with the state of Pennsylvania, and I'm in charge of restoring a watershed. How do you tenure that? That's an actual example, by the way, that a sculptor at Penn State did get tenure from his watershed restoration project. And that's epistemological asymmetries. What I really mean by that is the way of knowing, right? And what gets to make meaning, right? Whose meaning gets privilege in these partnerships, these collaborations, these parts of your brain, right? There's the left brain, there's the right brain, and it's all one brain. So how do you privilege particular elements over the other? And then we have these lingering questions, like, do we need a new language to talk about this stuff? Maybe we should abandon the terms art and science altogether when it comes to this space. Maybe we just don't use those languages. Maybe instead we talk about the systems and the methods themselves that we can employ at particular moments in a project. Who knows? And then one of the bigger questions that we're dealing with in-house right now is how do you, if you have a limited amount of resources at a university, how do you get some of the best people who can work in terms of breadth across, people like Leah, for example? And then how do you do that, but also have extremely good people who are known, really known at like the center of their field, if you have limited resources? How do you get around that? And that's an ongoing problem that all of those universities I mentioned are facing. So I am done talking, and I'm going to leave this shameless plug slide up while I answer questions. I'm done. Thanks for the silent clapping that two of you did. That's hilarious. All right, anybody have a question?
This whole hype about interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary in universities, we talked about during our first, the second class, a little bit of history about science, how science came to be, and we talked about how we are still in the utopian era of science. Do you think this movement might maybe change the way we acquire knowledge to bring us into a new era?
Well, new era might not be the way I would put it, but certainly maybe a new vision of the same old thing. Because it's one of those things where, if you look, let's take the medical field, for example. The history of the MD as a degree. It used to be that the highest degree in any field was the PhD. And then there are professional degrees. If you were going to go to the doctor in medieval times, and then up until probably the mid-1800s or something like that, you would you'd go to someone who knew everything, who knew it all, right? Someone who was a philosopher slash medical person slash, there was one kind of smart, right? And then we've divorced that out into different kinds of professional degrees over time, right? There's the PhD, which is sort of a researchy kind of degree. There's always a research element. And then there are professional degrees, like an MD. That's a professional degree. There's an MFA, a professional degree. There's a JD, which is a professional degree. You're good at that practice. So I guess the way that I would relate this back to your question is there are always competing utopic visions. And the interests from that utopia that we are kind of in from a scientific zone where that's the new authority as opposed to like an old authority, will be subject to, or already is subject to these changes we've been discussing, but even that will be subject to something else, I guess. There's always a challenge that helps contain and define the new thing, which is always sort of directly linked somehow to the chinks in its armor. So if a new utopia is achieved of some kind, it guarantees the emergence of one afterward. Yeah.
So sort of something that I was thinking of as you were speaking was this idea that there's the ally and the alloy. And a lot of what's going on now is someone who has, you were talking about how there's a professor of engineering and then there's the dance choreographer and then they work together. Would you suggest that people sort of start out integrated, or would you say become a master of one sort of field and sort of work at it? Because currently the sort of larger philosophy is the jack of all trades, master of none.
Well, yeah, that's okay. So several answers simultaneously. Or did you have? Sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, she's mad at me because that was her question.
Oh, all right. So to the two of you, I mentioned this Studio for Creative Inquiry at Carnegie Mellon. Its director is a guy named Golan Levin, who is sassy, to say the least. And Golan is trained he's a visual artist. He actually is a product of the MIT Media Lab. And he feels very strongly that he defines himself as anti-disciplinarian, okay? And he says there are really two kinds of interdisciplinary scholars, or whatever you want to call it, transdisciplinary scholars. There are those that are masters of their domain, and they partner with someone else who is a master of that domain, and then they can create something together. They seek out the expertise. Or there are those who just go become experts in something that they aren't necessarily trained in. And in his mind, I'm going to paraphrase him, he basically argues that if you are an artist, you need to be able to write code. That's his whole paradigm, which is kind of intense and difficult. So the other side of my answer is that nobody goes into college a strict disciplinarian. Like you might be, whatever your major is, right? Whatever your major is, that's not all you are. And that's not all you ever have been. But the deeper you get into that training, theoretically at least, the deeper you go into that training, the narrower your focus gets, right? And other ways of knowing the world become less and less visible or possible to you. They seem more distant, even though they're not really. So to totally avoid answering your difficult question and instead throw words at you out of my face hole, it's our job to find ways to get out of your way and let you do what you need to do as adults to become experts in whatever that is, even if that thing doesn't exist yet, if that makes sense. So it's not our choice, it's your choice. Each of you need to answer that question, and then we need to find ways to support your answer.
Kind of related to that question. So since I started this fellowship, I these triple students who come into my office and ask me about career options because they have a dual degree in, science and arts or like music and engineering, and they wonder if that would give them something, like if that would actually give them the daily bread that you describe of, besides from just being interested in this and that. How do you answer that?
Well, all right, there's, again, two answers, right? One answer is that in, I think, 2012, there was maybe the Rand Corporation or maybe it was IBM did a poll of all of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies and asked them to rank skill sets. And the top of everybody's list, in the top 5 characteristics of what they would value in employees: creativity, skills for innovation. Creativity, skills for innovation. They are looking for people to have that kind of an integrative skill set, married with expertise of some kind. However, I don't think, and speaking more from the art side of things now, I will say that artists don't go get a job in the traditional sense, right? A professional working artist. They make a market for themselves. They are a market of one. And in that sense, artists are consummate entrepreneurs, right? They're the very ethos of an entrepreneur, which is kind of an uncomfortable thing to hear as an artist, right? Because you don't want to be labeled like that. But think about what you have to do to have a successful working career. You create your own language out of some medium that that other people care about, right? You shape a reality out of the context that we all share in a way that's meaningful to other people, and not, and to yourself, hopefully. That's an incredibly powerful thing, and I don't think that it's something we should take lightly. It's something we should value more as a way of communicating, which is also